Why, hello, good morning on this beautiful Tuesday morning. We are live here on Zoom. And of course, you're there and I'm here, and we are getting through this together. That's right. I also threw up Instagram for a moment. So shout out to Denise, all those who came with us to Sam Ash. You met Denise, and she's on our Instagram live right now, taking a peek. And we are about to kick off today's lesson in just a few moments. But before we do, we should definitely go over what's going on. Started my collection process again, trying to find more students who are supposed to be here in the room. And so you might see a few new names pop up there. I'm tremendously hoping that these students remember that this class is not an option for all those who are still signed into it. And at this point, you're locked in, baby. There's no going nowhere. So the only option is to actually do the work for now. I'm just going to empty my trash because I have a bunch of garbage in there I don't need. And to finish out the year, to get all the work done that needs to get done. I want to remind all of my gym people to make sure you're doing gym and sending it on to Miss Caracciolo. I posted her email address here in the stream, so when you are done with a chapter, please send it to her. The book 4, is in the stream as well, so you can just use that as a reference to do your chapter and your reading and all that other good stuff. So just, again, make sure that you're keeping up with it right here on March 31st, Book 4A. Go ahead and click on that PDF. You can download and you can have that PDF. It's yours to keep. And, of course, do the work on a piece of paper and take a picture of it and then email it to her so she knows you're doing it and gives you credit for it. And make sure you do that sooner than later. You do not want to get into May and find out you have 5 chapters of gym to do, because they're going to ask for it sooner than later. They're going to start making your districts aware that you have not completed gym, which in some cases could possibly fail you for the year. And you cannot graduate high school or move on to the next year unless you take gym. That is a New York State requirement. So please make sure you're doing that. To my gym people. All right, what else we got going on here? I threw up in the stream today that we're going to explore the compression in Logic. Yep, sure are. The code is always there. It should be towards the top of every new week. And, of course, the assignments that were assigned to you last week. You had Project 9 that was due on Friday, and you took a quiz on Friday via Google Classroom. So please make sure, if you haven't done that, that you do it. Like I said, my grade book is being shared with our guidance counselors. So this is what they're seeing with your names. Obviously, I'm hiding your names, just so you don't, know who's getting what. But please make sure you're doing all your assignments. And if you're doing your assignments and doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're doing great in the class. Probably better than you would if we were in class. But the people who are not doing the work, you are miserably failing, and you will start finding that there's going to be a lot of angry phone calls to your house, not just from our school, but now from your home school, who we've now leaned on to help us make sure you understand the importance of finishing out audio production here online, or at least doing it while we are in distant learning. And then just to give you an update, of course, if you watched any of the latest updates from our governor and beyond, you know that he is not looking to close the schools just yet. And I don't think he will. But either way, distance learning will be the way we finish out the year, if in fact he does. Just because he closes the buildings doesn't mean we're going to close down the programs and the learning. So please make sure that you keep track of that. And of course, make sure that you're doing the work you're supposed to do. And like I said, the people who are doing great, which is awesome. And I know it's not easy. Look, it's not easy for us to make this big change. Sorry, I'm just waving the chef really quick. What's up, chef? I know it's a big change. I know it's a big deal, but we kind of just need to finish out whatever time we have in this purgatory that we are in, getting and doing the best we can. And then when we finally do get back, and hopefully that's sooner than later, as everything is starting to die down a little bit, but we're not quite out of it yet, that we able to get back together, and then we can have proper grades and proper graduation, and we can see you all off to the fun part which is the next step in your career and in your life. Awesome. Anybody have any questions about the work? I got an email or a couple emails yesterday and actually last week about the work that's coming up. Anthony, I know I got your email about the scholarships. Yes, I did post scholarships up here on the stream. There are 3 scholarships. There's actually a 4th that I have to send out. This one's the Actia Scholarship. This one's the FAIR, and this one's the Laverty. Just read it and see if you qualify. And then, of course, do the things that you want to, what they require you to do. And then I sent an email, Anthony, to our guidance counselors to find out what the strategy is on getting letters of recommendation off to you, considering I don't have a Fisher letterhead, which is what I usually do it on. And then we also, can't send it out to a sealed envelope. So if I can get an address to send it to, or I guess I'll look at the scholarship information. As long as it doesn't have to be on letterhead, I have no problems getting you a letter of recommendation for that scholarship. So please make sure if you've completed these that you send the scholarship information where it needs to go. Let me know what you need from me. And then when I find out about things like official transcripts or letters of recommendation on letterhead and that kind of stuff, and even dates that they're due, I will let you know as soon as I know. All right. So thanks for the emails, everybody. Again, if you have any questions about the projects that are coming up or the test that was last week, or if you're having any problems with Google Classroom, remember you can always email me. Don't feel weird emailing me. It's my school address, motoole@wsboces.org. And I check my email several times a day. I'm on it pretty much all day. I have my laptop set up here all day long, and I'm constantly here doing work and getting things done. And I have other projects I'm working on too. So I always have this laptop open and ready to go. All right. Any questions about any of the work or anything that's going on? All right. Well, peace out to Denise and Chef. Good morning, and we'll see you guys later. I use Instagram just to collect all my kids. If they weren't paying attention to the time, they get a notification that we're live, which to them should mean, oh, we have to go over to the Zoom. So thanks, Insta. Later, guys. And we're getting them out. So they are gone. Goodbye. All right. So let's talk a little about logic for a moment. Review what we talked about yesterday, which was dealing with EQ. Hold on, let Wawa in. What up, Wawa? What up? What up? What up? What up? All right, here we go. So yeah, we went through this a little bit yesterday, talking a little bit about EQ. What I did, just to bring you up to date, is I recorded a small piece of audio here. That piece of audio was just my voice through this microphone that you're hearing me now. And of course, there's things I do have to worry about when I'm recording audio. Obviously, it's the level of expertise of the musician, in this case, the vocalist. It's how they record, the acoustics of the room, the type of microphone they're using, the signal chain from the mic to the computer. All those things have to go into account. But in the end, what we're EQing is the result. All right, as much as that signal chain matters a lot, and I'm very used to my personal signal chain, there are sometimes that you're not 100% familiar with it. So that's going to take a little bit of getting used to, a little bit of a learning curve, as we say. And the ability for you to kind of lock down that mic interface or any modules that you're using, rack units, before it gets into the computer, anything you're getting before it gets into the computer is going to be up to you. But once it's in the computer, that's when we're going to rely heavily on what Logic is capable of doing to help control that track within the mix. So yesterday, we put on a channel EQ, a very basic EQ. In this case, I made one little change, but we actually were talking a lot about using presets, and presets allow us a direction in which to start sending our vocals to. I think yesterday I chose one of these male vocals, and I think we ended up going with a speaking improvement or just a general clear vocal plugin or preset for that matter. And you could see, this is rolling off a lot of low end, which if my vocals through the signal chain of my mic and my interface had a lot of low end in it, as a result, I'd probably want to control that a little bit. Or if I use my vocal presence, you can see a very heavy boost in the 5K area, which allows a lot of high frequencies of my voice to come out. And of course, it rolls off some low frequencies. Now, I don't necessarily always want to do that. So like I said, the presets are a good place to start, but it's not a good place to end. Me personally would probably drag this closer down to 2K and only have a small boost, and I would roll off probably below about 80. And this says it's 50, but that's fine. I'm good with what I have here. So I'm not getting rid of all of the low end of my voice. I still like my 80 to 100, and I like a little pop here in the 2K. And no, I probably wouldn't have any high frequencies. And this is basically what my vocal EQ curve would look like normally on my signal chain that I have right now. So that's my SM7B with my cloud exciter, we'll say, my amplifier, into my Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, and then into the computer. That's my vocal chain that I'm very familiar with. I've used it a million times. And then now that I know I have my right vocal chain in, now I can go ahead and play around with my EQ. And like I said, I'm pretty familiar with this particular setup, which is a little tiny boost in the 2K area and a roll off below around 80, which is somewhere around here, even though this says it's at, well, it is at 80, exactly, 80 hertz right there. Boom. So it basically starts right around here and then rolls off back end. I don't really need anything in the mix of my voice below 80 hertz. And that's what our EQ does. It basically boosts and cut frequencies between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz. All right. And it's, again, all about control. It's all about getting the right signal for my voice in the mix. I don't know if you're going to hear direct audio from my computer. I signed up for it, but let me see if it comes out. And if not, I'll just point the mic at it really quick so you can hear it. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. So yeah, if you're here with me, or if you had headphones on, or if you were able to clearly hear what changes were made in the EQ, you'll notice that my low end isn't all gone. It's controlled. My high end, my 2K, 1K area, actually cuts through the mix a little bit. So when I bring it into the mix, it should stand out a little better. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. And I can still find right now that my my grand piano at this point does kind of stand out a little more. So again, in the way of mixing, I'd probably want to pull my piano down a little bit in this area. Let's see how that sounds. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Yeah, and so that sounds a lot better because now the piano's down in the mix. But that was the point. Using my EQ here on my track allowed me a little bit of control to allow my voice to stand out in the mix a little bit. Now, the other thing we can use in regards to volume is a compressor, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So I'm going to go ahead and back on my vocal track. In fact, while I'm doing this, let's just call this Vox because it's vocals. And so I'm going to go ahead and go over to my mixer for a moment. I'm going to go into my audio effects, which is right here, this whole strip of audio effects. We used to call them inserts in Pro Tools, but in Logic, they call them audio effects. So let's go into audio effects underneath my channel EQ, which I keep first. I'm going to now put a compressor on. So I'm going to drop down my menu. I'm going to go into dynamics because this is where most of the compressors are found. So let's go through this list a little bit, and I'll show you some types of compressors, and then we'll choose a compressor, and we'll show you how to manipulate it a little bit to help that vocal track stand out even more in the mix by compressing it. I know it sounds counterproductive, right? I don't want to squeeze something down, but then it not still be in the mix as a prevalent part or the main part of what I'm looking for. All right, let's go through these really quick. All right, I got an adaptive limiter. So a limiter, and what we didn't cover in Pro Tools, because that's usually where we end up talking about limiters when we do mastering. A limiter is basically a compressor, but it has a very high ratio. And if you remember, one of the parameters of a compressor is ratio. All right, how much sound is being compressed versus how much sound is going over the threshold. So if I go over the threshold 2 decibels, I'm pulling back 20 decibels, 2 to 10, or 10 to 1 rather. So if I go 2 over, it's 20 back. All right. So a limiter is literally just set up to be a higher ratio compressor. Let's just take a look at what that is. So you don't see any of the normal parameters that you would see in a compressor You do see a gain, which means a boost. You do see a threshold, which here they're calling an out ceiling. And you see something called a look ahead. Let me explain what a look ahead is. It's the computer's way of actually looking ahead a certain amount of time to gain as much information about what's coming so it more accurately compresses when it gets to it. Yes, it's kind of like going forward in time. It is. It's exactly what it is. So how much time do I go forward in this particular plugin? Right now, this preset is for 50 milliseconds, but I can crank that up to about 200 milliseconds. Now, here's the problem with that. This does take computer processing. This takes a while for the computer to jump ahead 50 milliseconds and let you hear what's going on in real time. So you're hearing what's going on in real time, but the compressor's looking ahead 50 to 200 milliseconds so it can make a more accurate limit on the signal. We will get to an adaptive limiter more when we talk about putting compression on the master track. Let's see what else we got. We have our standard compressor. We're going to get back to that. You guys know what the deal would be. Deesser. Love me a deesser. Oh, my goodness. So my voice is not very high frequency. I don't have a lot of S's and P's within my voice that really need a clamp down on high frequencies. But this is what a deesser does. It actually helps get rid of some of those high P's and S's in your voice. This is great for female vocals and even male vocals that have a lot of sibilance in it. So here are the signal things here. There is a detector, which basically will look at certain bands of frequencies. And there is a suppressor, which is what will grab a hold and reduce those frequencies. You can give it some sensitivity, i.e. what quality of de-essing we're going to do. The strength of that particular suppression, like how hard and how fast and how tight and how much it's going to pull it down. We have a smoothing meter here, which basically means, again, a look ahead. And then how can I smooth out the transition from things that do need de-essing to things that don't need de-essing? I don't particularly like Logic's de-esser. It's the old version. It's back in the 32-bit area, which means it's probably Logic 7 or 8 at this point. So they haven't really updated the de-esser. I use third-party de-essing because they're usually better at their algorithms to create good de-essing finals. We have an enveloper. What's an envelope? Oh, an envelope is the shape of a waveform from first attack to final release. So this is a compressor based on that concept. You are going to see some of the very basic parameters that we see in a compressor, like threshold and gain. And there's a look ahead here as well. Now, here is where the enveloper takes place. So this is looking at, picture a waveform behind this line. And you can see that it's going to clamp down very fast on the attack, and it's going to slowly release. But you could change all that, adjusting the shape of this particular enveloper. So it's going to take a look. It's going to do compression kind of based upon waveforms, entire envelopes. Again, on the back end, you can boost or cut the gain depending on what settings you use back here. And of course, then you can balance it all out using a final thing. But again, this is an old version of an enveloper. So I don't necessarily use the old versions. I use third party, or I would go somewhere else with it. Expander is kind of similar. This helps open up the signal a little more. Again, you'll see basic compression settings, ratio and knee. Oh, knee finally came into place here. Attack and release, the threshold and the gain. So this looks very much like a regular compressor. Only its goal isn't necessarily to pull down the highs and expand the lows and create a more consistent signal. This is more like trying to create more volume out of it to expand the dynamic range, which isn't necessarily exactly what it does. Hard to explain without actually playing it in class and showing you the differences in what a compressor versus an expander do. But we do have some, presets here that can give you an idea, like crispen up, right? So doesn't that mean you'd want to hear more of the signal? High expansion, which to me means it's just going to be louder. more punch, again, meaning louder. So, it's instead of trying to soften it or create less dynamic range throughout a signal, it's really trying to expand that dynamic range. It's kind of the opposite, but still doing the same thing. All right. A limiter is just basically, like we said before, an adaptive limiter and a limiter are very similar. Adaptive just works by looking ahead and adapting to each individual waveform, whereas a limiter is just a flat out 10-to-1 compressor. And so our limiter is updated. You can see the new controls here. And again, gain, release, output level, look aheads, they're all basically the same. So I do use this limiter at times when it's necessary. A multipressor, love a multipressor. We will definitely talk about multipressors back or later when we discuss our mastering, because this allows compression within very specific frequency ranges. So I don't have to compress the entire signal. If I find that my mid lows are very dynamic, a huge range of signals from the top of the peak to the bottom, and it's varied throughout, I might find that a multipressor will help me contain that specific frequency range, or control, not even contain. I don't want to say it like we're trapping it, but control. We are controlling specific frequency ranges by allowing 4 individual compressors to work in these ranges. So this is actually 4 different compressors, and they all have their own settings. Again, threshold, ratio, attack, release, ratios, reductions, all the same parameters we see in a normal compressor, we're seeing here, but we're actually seeing 4 of them. And you can adjust the range. You can adjust which areas you really want to control. So for instance, if I really wanted to compress 60 hertz and lower, so it's 20 hertz to 60 hertz, I would set my bar to where it needs to be. And then once I have it at 60, I can then create some sort of compression settings using that. And of course, every single compressor, 1, 2, 3, and 4, has its own settings for the parameters. And again, lots of presets here. I've used these presets, especially when we're doing at the master, and you could see very clearly that the presets are labeled as if you were doing a complete mix. So final rock compressor, that means if you're dealing with rock music, you might want to use a rock compressor on the master track, because it can compress different areas of the mix. And when you have a kick in the low end and a cymbal at the high end, and in the high end, you also have these strings or guitars, and then you have the bass guitar in the low, you want to be able to have individual frequencies to control without having to go back to the original tracks. So I usually put my multipressor on a final master track, and that would include something over here. Over here on the stereo out is where I would place that. I wouldn't put that necessarily on an individual track unless it had a lot of different things going on in the mix. Finally, a noise gate. And this is something a little different. The noise gate is basically, if you think about it, you have animals, you have pets in the backyard, you open the gate, they run out. That's exactly what this is. This is a gate that closes off the signal until it reaches the threshold. Then the gate opens and the sound comes out. Once the sound is gone and dropped below the threshold, the gate closes and you don't hear anything else. This is extremely handy when you're recording drums. You want to get rid of some of the background noise. You want only direct sound from that mic on that drum. When the stick hits that tom drum, I want to hear it. But when it's not playing the tom drum, do I really want to hear the cymbals and the snare in that tom mic? No, I don't. This allows you to be very, very specific on mics within a larger kit or in a larger hole. So I find this also very useful when using mics in an orchestra. When the violins are playing really, really loud, and then the horn section comes in and the violins stop, I really don't want sometimes the background of the horns to be in the violin mics. So I'm going to put a small, soft, very easy gate on that. So it either opens and closes very hard, or it opens slowly and closes slowly. And sometimes the way you manipulate your gate makes it even sound better. And you can see there's an open and a close right here on the track. There is actually threshold and reductions, attack and hold and release. This is the smoothness of that gate opening and closing. There are some roll-offs, so you can roll off below 20 and above 20K, and you can shrink this range down. So for me, like for instance, I mentioned a tom drum. I know the frequency range of that tom drum. Maybe it's the high tom. So the high tom necessarily wouldn't have any low. So I'd probably end up rolling off, let's say 150 or lower. And that high tom wouldn't have anything above 1K. So I'd probably shrink this down to around 1K. So that tom drum ends up only showing through when the signal is between 150 hertz to 1000 hertz. The gate would open, it would let the signal through, and the gate would close. So a gate is very useful when it's used within a larger hole of a mic that's in a mix. And it does kind of act as a dynamic compressor almost. It only activates when triggered by a certain level. So that's why it's here under the dynamics. Let's talk about the compressor for today, our compressor that we're going to be using a lot of. Now, Logic did a great job back in Logic 9 to start updating a lot of its plugins. I showed you some plugins that have not been updated. Logic has not come out with a more modernized version, both in look and in algorithm. Maybe they felt like they didn't want to spend too much time in things like a Deesser. But the things that are used the most in Logic have been updated. So like I said, the adaptive limiter, the gate, and here in the compressor, these are things that engineers use a lot. So those have all been updated. Now let's talk about what we're seeing here, because this is one of the hardest things to kind of comprehend and understand. When you look at it, it looks so complicated and so crazy. It even looks more complicated than Pro Tools' version of this, because Pro Tools' version of this actually was never updated. They rely solely on third-party plugins doing the updates and making better algorithms. But what comes with it is actually pretty solid. You know, Pro Tools did a great job initially with their compressor, and Logic did a great job with the first version. But now, since we have more modernized looks and feels and algorithms, they updated everything and they gave you a lot more options. So let's take a look at this. All right. Up here at the top, we have seven different types of compressors. Now, let's talk about that for a moment. All right. The Platinum Digital compressor is based upon the old version of Logic's compressor. It used to look like, and let me see if I can pop this up. It used to look like, the old compressor used to look like, and let's see if I can get up here. Yeah, it used to look like this. And this isn't what it was. It just looks like this. You see the colors and the rounded edges and the beveled stuff and things like that. This is what the old compressor looked like. So you can tell that there's been an update just visually in the actual compressor. And so they did that. They did that for their original one. And here it's called Platinum Digital. But then they decided to add 6 more compressors based upon different types of compression. Now, there are types of compression called VCA, and that's what Studio VCA is. And yes, it looks red and it looks fancy, but that has nothing to do with why you should choose it. There is a studio version of a FET compressor. Now, FET compressors to me are used a lot in bass and guitar, not much in vocals or drums. I tend to use basic opto for things like vocals or the Platinum Digital. And I'm not saying this is a across the board thing. It's just stuff I prefer. But you'll see that a lot of engineers use FET compressors instead of VCA compressors just because of the way they distort or the way that they handle very loud sounds. So like, you know, distorted guitars is why I said the word distorted, but distorted guitars do very well under FET compression, in my opinion. I'm constantly using FET compression for my distorted guitars. But when I go to VCA for studio, I find this works well sometimes with drums and sometimes with strings. Of course, my digital, like I mentioned, is your old school OG, triple OG version of the compressor. So VCAs, FETs, lots of other VCAs here too. So there's a classic VCA that I sometimes use for vocals, a vintage VCA, a vintage FET. So, there's studio, there's classic, there's vintage, and then there's vintage opto. And so this one is the one I do use a lot for vocals. And it is based upon the way it compresses. Again, it's going to be hard to explain, just using words and the way we're doing our lessons now, exactly what the differences are. But what I can tell you is that it's based upon actual hardware. If you went back into our room, into the rack in the back, and saw some of the compressors that we have in our rack, you'll see that our compressors are all mostly based upon an opto or optical or opto version of the um, compressor. Let's play around with this a little bit and let's see if we can tell the differences between our signals. I'm going to solo my vocals. All right. And I'm going to put on the Platinum Digital and just use the system default. Nothing crazy. What I want you to do while I'm playing this back and changing it between our different styles of compression, to take a look at, number one, what the signal level is coming in here, and then what the signal going out is here based upon which one I hit. All right, so let's take a listen. I'll do all 7 once through each. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. So again, I know it's hard for you to hear the differences, but let me explain to you what the differences were as we went through. The one that really stood out to me as we were playing back was this Studio FET. This thing added a next level of brightness and close to peaking distortion that you can't get anywhere else. The rest of these all sounded pretty consistent from start to finish. Now, another thing that you might want to look at as I'm going to play it back as I'm doing it, is you could see the input and output. So on our Platinum Digital here, you see your input and output is pretty much the same. There's not much difference. Let's go to the studio. You can see the input, but this output is just slightly louder now. Let's go to the FET. Now you can see the FET actually really pushes it closer to the 0 dB mark. If we go over into our classic VCA, it drops down and goes back to pretty much normal. Vintage, again, same concept. It's a little louder, but nothing crazy. Your vintage FET, yeah, it's pretty even from start to finish or from in to output. And your vintage opto, again, the range between in and out is not very large. And you can see the meter right here not really working very difficultly. Again, go to Studio FET and there's a big old difference. So what we're seeing there is a major, major, major difference in how these 7 different plugins or 7 different settings in the compressor work. All right. Let's take a look at our Platinum Digital, our basic one, and let's just take a look at the pieces and the parts really fast so you can kind of get a idea of where we're looking at. All right, so our threshold. You know what our threshold does, correct? It draws a line in the sand. Any signal that goes over negative 20 decibels will get compression. What type of compression? All depends on what goes on after that. So we know our ratio, 2 to 1 here. On vocals, I usually crank it up to 3 to 1. That means it will reduce it by a 3 to 1 ratio. So for every decibel that goes up, it'll reduce it by 3, or 3 decibels by 1, depending on how you look at it. We have our knee, which basically is the shape of the compression, from a hard knee, which is very, very direct, to a soft knee, which actually smooths out the compression levels. Again, you're trying to reduce the dynamic range. So is it really different, or is it just smoothly different? It does have a big effect. Your attack and release, so how fast the compressor reacts once the signal has gone over the threshold. Right now, we're at 16 milliseconds. So as soon as the signal goes over negative 20, it takes 15 to 16 milliseconds for the compressor to grab onto it and pull it back. Once the signal has dropped below the negative 20 decibel threshold, how long does it take for the compressor to let go of the signal and let it go back to normal? And that has to do with the release. And if you lost any signal on these 5 different signals, parameters, let's say, between the attack, the knee, the threshold, the release, then you can make up that gain here. All right. You can make it up. If you lost 5 decibels in your mix, then you can go ahead and add 5 more decibels to it to balance it back out. That all depends on the strength and the amount of compression you're adding into this. There is actually a way that you can turn on auto gain, which means it'll rebalance it out. Whoops, sorry, let me go back into this. It'll balance it back out for you to around the negative 12. I tend to keep the auto gain off because I'm really very specific on my settings when I do a mix. But, sometimes auto actually does work. So you can choose what you're looking to do, up to you. Again, like I said, I turn it off, and then I'm very specific on my settings here. So I'm going to have an input and then an output. Let's go over here to our output section, and here's what's very interesting. All of these compressors have a limiter after the compressor. So it's actually 2 plugins on one. First, the compressor on the left-hand side, and then as it's going out to the final track, we have a limiter that we can turn on, which basically means we can actually keep the signal going beyond a certain decibel range. So if I said I want my limiter on and I don't want any signal to go above -6, well, now when I push play, no signal will cross this line. It is a hard brick wall that doesn't allow the signal to go beyond what it's supposed to go beyond. So sometimes I'll go ahead and drop it to a -0.1, just to make sure we don't have any crazy peaks or valleys, anything that's going to go into the track and distort anything. And I'll leave that on as a basic safety net, just in case I screwed something up. It'll actually keep it from ever reaching that 0 mark. I'm not a huge fan of doing that all the time, but you'll notice if I go into my studio FET here and I have it on, it actually will kind of trigger at times. Well, no, because my signal's not very loud. Yeah, so there's not much going on there. So it wouldn't really even need to be on because it never really comes close to 0. So I could turn that off. There's also a little edge distortion setting in, I'll go back to platinum here, an edgy distortion setting here. So you can have like some that go over, some signals go over your threshold. And when they do, you'll get like a nice, soft, edgy distortion to it. Not clipping, not terrible, but it does give a little life to the signal. You can actually use the limiter to your advantage to gain a little bit of edge to your signal. You could do it soft, you could do it hard, you could really do it right at clip level. I mean, that could be really cool if you're looking to get some sort of really hard edge out of it. Sometimes I might even do it to a even a guitar that has distortion, but maybe I want a little more. Maybe I just want that little last bit that my pedal or my amplifier or the way I recorded it didn't give me. I don't really, like I said, use the limiter all that much because I'm very specific on my settings. So between the auto gain and the limiter, I kind of keep them off until the very end. But just to let you know, reasons why they build this stuff in here, again, is to give you full control over a lot of the settings and the sound of the signals. Let's just quickly look at VCA. You'll notice very quickly the VCA, the knee is gone. Bye-bye knee. No more knee. Knee hawa. It's gone. Now, why is that? Well, because what a studio VCA is. A studio VCA, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, has a set knee, which I believe is smooth. So we consider a studio VCA compressor to be more of a smoother type of compressor. The rest of the signals are all the same. My auto gain, my limiting, my ratio threshold, my attack and release, my makeup gain if I lost any signal. So all of that is the same except for the knee, and that's because of the way Studio VCA is designed. Let's look at FET. Same thing. So studio-based compressors in Logic drop the knee because this one's probably soft and this one's probably really hard. Starting to see the differences? Good. So yeah, the knee is gone because they don't want you to change it. And that's because of the way the studio FET is. And we know, based upon what we were watching before when I was playing it back, that it really does add a lot of life to the signal. You can tell just by looking at what the input level is and then what the output level is. So when I bring in the classic VCA, you'll see even more stuff disappear. Now you're just dealing with a threshold, a ratio, and a makeup. There's no attack and release. Again, this is what makes the classic VCA the classic VCA. It already has set parameters for attack and release, giving it its classic VA name. If I go into vintage, things come back. When I'm in the vintage VCA, I have a threshold ratio makeup. I have a knee attack release. I have everything back here in the same digital platinum or platinum digital, just a different color, just to, I guess, separate it out. Again, these have default settings. You know, I'm in factory default this entire time. So you'll see the ratio or the knee has changed a little bit. The attack, the release, those things do change along the way. All right, let's take a look at our vintage FET. Do I see any additional settings? No, no additional parameters have shown up here. So this must be about kind of how it processes it. Again, the algorithm used to create that final signal. Let me drop this down and just take a look. Oh, look at that. There are presets in the compressor. We'll go to that in a minute. But I just want to show you that there are some particular ones that use very specific types of compressions. Finally, opto. Again, nothing really has changed. So the ones that really stand out to me, Studio VCA and Studio FET are missing the knee, and the classic gets rid of the knee, the attack, and release. The other four here all have all their settings. And honestly, these are the four I typically use, believe it or not, except for this with guitars, because this one I really do like the way it handles guitars. All right, let's go into some presets and take a look at what they think and the parameters are for very specific types of compression for things like drums, keyboards, guitars, voice, and other types of tools. Let's start with drums, and let's just go to a rock kit. So for a rock kick, they believe a vintage FET is the best way, and here are the settings. Again, presets are great to use as a direction, not as a final destination. So here are the settings. My threshold is going to be set around -30. That means anything over 30 decibels, -30 decibels is going to be compressed. The ratio is around a 4:1. I don't mind that. I usually crank that up just a little bit to about a 5:1 for a rock kick. Makeup gain, well, that means because I'm going to lose some volume in this threshold ratio settings, I'm going to have to make up a little bit. Let's see how the knee looks. Knee looks about 0.7. It's not bad. It's a relatively smooth knee. I'm sorry, relatively hard knee. And you're going to need that for something as hard and punching like a kick. The attack is pretty slow. The release is even slower. So these two settings are set to be very slow. A very long attack, a very slow release, comparatively, you know, comparative to other things that we do with vocals and whatnot. Let me go back in here. All right. Is the limiter on? The answer is no. So again, I'm not using the limiter, and the people that built these presets do not believe in the limiter for the rock kick. All right, let's go voice. Actually, no, let's go guitars. I'm going to do a guitar heavy. Oh, and it kept me in the vintage FET. That's interesting. Let's see if any of the other ones have a different setting. Well, classic for a classic guitar. That makes sense. Crunchy guitar likes the vintage VCA. Bass heavy. Ooh, goes back to the FET. I don't mind that. I don't mind that. Let's see what a rock bass wants to be. Classic. No one's using the studio FET. I don't know why. Opto bass. I wonder which one it's going to use. Oh, look at that. Vintage opto. Magical. And last but not least, you can choose FET for like that. But again, it's going to give you the vintage FET as opposed to the studio FET. And like I said, it's a preference. I like the studio FET for guitars, but apparently they think that you should be using something else. Not a big deal. All right, let's go into voice. Let's start with like a studio vocal. Oh, and studio vocals actually do like the studio FET. Interesting. Okay. I've used studio FET for vocals before. Yep. Let's go classic rock. Classic rock loves the studio VCA. Cool. So this is my point. You know, if you're producing music and you're using instruments, some of these presets can give you a look into how the professionals or what part of the compressor the professionals think you should be in. And then once you get there, you can make adjustments to the preset because they gave you that direction. And then you got to find your destination within the mix. Let's go back into my voice, and then let's just do a vintage vocal. So it's going to drop me over back to my vintage FET. And now let's see what it looks like when I push play. You're not going to hear it right away. But take a look at what's going on here. Take a look at the input level to the output level. All right. That's what's really interesting, is that it's really pushing that vocal level into the mix. All right. Let's see how it sounds when I open it up. I'm going to turn it off first so you can hear it. And this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in. Sorry, I deleted it by accident. Let's do it again. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. So you can hear that once I added that plugin, and I had to step it back again, but once I added that plugin, the vocals really jumped out. You can see it visually in the meters, again, input to output, and you can hear it in the mix. So let's do that. Let's now bring it into the mix. Let's hear it for a second without the plugin, and here it is. There we go. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Okay, so now let's take the plugin and turn it on, and let's see how much more that vocal track stands out in the mix. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. And you can see now that vocal track really comes out. It is the forefront of my mix. And that's what I was looking for. Now, to me, it's probably a little much. A little much. So I would adjust things here. Like I said, it's a good direction to go in. I found a path to follow, but I'm not at the end of my path yet. So I'm going to go in and maybe change the makeup gain and drop it back down to 0, or I'll push the threshold a little higher, about 24 or 22, somewhere in there. So it's not as distorted. Again, I'm reducing dynamic range and being able to get more gain out of this without actually ever having to touch a fader. And you remember me in class saying probably shouldn't be touching faders right away. And this is because you're going to add a compressor, and the compressor is going to do that naturally and probably better than you touching faders. Let's hear. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. Punch in, and this is a test only on the punch in. I think that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. I wanted that signal to go from, -9 to -3 dynamic range to basically be between -3 and 0 dynamic range. And that's what we did. We shrunk it down. We shrunk down the dynamic range from about 9 to about 3. We compressed it. And then we were able to bring the entire volume up now to a different range between -3 and 0. And that really allows that vocal track to stand out in the mix. That is how we very accurately use compression to create volume without having to touch faders, without having to add other things. Again, this is a step-by-step process. We start with that EQ, just listening and trying to make sure we get what we want out of that track, not volume-wise, clarity and total volume. And then we come into the compressor where we can now start balancing the whole thing out. And now we start bringing that track into the other tracks and see how they all play together. Do they play nicely? Am I getting the result I'm looking for? Is it, in the end, throughout the entire track, not just in this 2-bar loop, what I'm looking for. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of time spent, especially early on in your career, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. Because a lot of times we're not all recording the same thing. We're not all doing the same thing. We don't have all the same musicians and instruments and mics and setups. So you're going to have to go through the process that I started with today, knowing your signal chain from your mic to your interface to your computer, knowing how to then activate certain parts of the software to get it to do what you want it to do, like adding an EQ, like balancing it out and getting what you want out of it. Then taking the next step towards compression, then releasing it back into the mix and seeing how it all works. Step by step, very, very direct in what you want. And in the end, of course, a lot of it has to do with how you monitor. Right now, I'm monitoring through my laptop speakers. I don't have my studio monitors set up. I don't have headphones on. But I'd have to go through that process too, making sure that what I'm getting out of this sounds good in other places. So that is our initial compressor talk today. Anybody have questions? I'll give a minute or two before we get out of here. While you're devising your questions, make sure, I can't stress this enough, make sure you go to the Google Classroom and do the work. Take the tests. Do it all. Yesterday was the day when it was windy and rainy and awful, and you had probably nothing else to do. Yesterday was that day, and I only got one person to hand something in after my plea in yesterday's lesson. So hopefully I have more this week. There's supposed to be another rainy day tomorrow. Today's a beautiful day. I do highly recommend getting out, taking a walk, staying away from people, but, breathing some fresh air, not just your house air. Get some fresh stuff. Questions. I'll take them.
O'Toole.
What up, man?
I got a question for a sec.
You only get 1 second, I promise.
All right.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's fine. I just want to have a question about how do you make the music sounding professional? Because whenever I was making music, it doesn't sound professional.
So what part is not sounding professional to you? The whole mix or the individual track?
So, maybe the individual, I guess.
Well, I mean, in vocals today, it's not just a single vocal track that's going to stand out. There's a lot of other things that go into creating a good professional vocal track. We're just taking it step by step right now. So you have to start there, though. I mean, you can't skip ahead and go from my mic in my bedroom to radio play, right? There's no skipping steps here. You have to start straight through. So again, if you're following what we're doing throughout the year, it's taking it little by little to kind of get you guys to realize there's, little baby steps. Once you've done it a lot and you know what you're looking for, of course, Anthony, use a reference track too. I mean, one of the best things to do is always go out, find a song that you like. You know what? Even try to see if you can get a vocals only track and listen to a vocals only track that was produced in a studio and try to mirror that. Try to do that using EQ, compression, timed effects, choruses, doubling up tracks with separate performances, messing around with pan. This is what those professionals have been doing for a very long time. And they got a sense of how to do it, not by someone telling them a magic code that they punch into their computer and all of a sudden things are exactly the way they want it. It's stuff they experimented with. Because like I said to you before, every instrument is different. Every vocalist is different. Every mic is different. Every setup is different. So if you know an idea of how to get to that place, which is going to take some time to develop, then you'll be able to adapt to the things like the instrument, the mic, the studio, and all those other things. So here's what I would say first. If I were you, Ant, I'd go out on the inner tubes and I try to find a vocals only track, right? Something that you're familiar with that is just someone's vocals, and listen to that and try to pick apart what they did. Is there stuff going on in the left and right ears differently? Is there 1, 2, or 4 different performances? Is there harmonies? Are they affecting the harmonies? Are they affecting the main vocals? How are they mixing that? Those are things you have to sit and analyze. They're not going to break it down for you. They're not going to give you their secrets because it's their secrets and it's the way they make their money. No one's going to give that to you. So it
Alright.
all depends on the type of music you want. It all depends on the setups that you have. But like I said, if you follow our steps, you're going to get closer and closer and closer to where you need to be.
Um,
EQ, compression, and then routing, sending effects.
um, uh, I was just gonna like say, I was gonna say that I was gonna think of EDM music. I was just want to try mix with something, and
Okay.
whenever I was doing it, didn't sound professional to me.
Well, again, you know how I gave you guys tracks. I'm just going to mute you for a second. When I gave you guys tracks, stems, right, for one of the projects, those stems actually were with effects. So they had everything on there. Now, if you listen to those tracks, sometimes just listening to those individual stems can unveil secrets that you were not sure of. So what I recommend doing, again, same thing, Ant, is to go find either stems or individual tracks from songs that you're familiar with and listen to them and break it down how you think that was made and try to mimic it. Put the track into Logic, listen to it, then try to create a duplicate from scratch. I learned that way with vocals. I ended up taking some of the music that I was making at the time, finding stems online and trying to mimic that. And I found out a really cool way to make something that sounds like that because that's what the artist wanted. The artist wanted something that sounded like this, but that's not every artist. So what I found was there is a base model. It's EQ, compression, and timed effects using sends. That allowed me to then build from there. That was my first initial, step, was to go through that process. And then once I got there and I got it to the level that they were competing at, then I looked into how are they, panning, how are they using other effects like choruses or ensembles or pitching or sending to another pitch and creating a harmony. There are so many different strategies that can be used that artists use. I can't lock you down to one. I can't tell you there's a magic wand. There isn't. It takes a long time to, go through that and practice it. It is. It's like knowing an instrument. Being an engineer is like knowing an instrument. You have to practice in order to become good at it. All right. What else? What other questions do you have? Answer those questions. Like I said, on Project 9 that you guys handed in last week, we'll be going through some of the questions you may have posed from that project, and also Project 9B, which is due this Friday. So please make sure you're doing that and creating 2 questions based upon what you just watched. Don't ask questions that you just have. We can do that later. Be sure to ask questions based upon what you saw in the master classes. So if a guy does something in MIDI, ask a question about MIDI, but don't ask about how can I get a better mix out of MIDI. Well, that's not what he was talking about in the 45-minute window of what you were watching. That happened somewhere else. So ask questions pertinent to the 15-minute window that you watched that day. Please make sure you're keeping up with that work. I know I only received about 12 projects last week out of the 30-something kids that are supposed to be in here. Like I said, hopefully we'll be collecting more kids on the students on the Google Classroom. So as we keep going out there and trying to corral them into our Google Classroom, you guys that have been here for about a month now better have some work done. You've been here for a month. You can't go a month without doing anything. It will come down. It will crash on you very, very hard, and you do not want that in May and June when it's beautiful and you want to relax. And after this, we all need to relax. You really want to put yourself in a good place. All right. Well, listen, you guys enjoy your day. I'll be back here tomorrow for some more pain and punishment, as I always say. And of course, anybody that has any questions, please make sure you ask. You can email me. You can get through me through the Google Classroom. If you're having trouble with anything, please let me know. And everyone stay safe. And I will see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Have a great day, everybody.